Hi everybody, it's meteorologist Cioffi here, and I got a little bit of a split screen going on so you can take a look at what's happening near the Chicago area, where we've got some snow this evening. This is 6 o'clock Eastern time, and we've got this band of snow which was further north earlier today and last night, but has since kind of shrunk down just a little bit and runs up into northern Indiana and southernmost Michigan. You can see how narrow this band actually is. It's not some widespread snow event that's occurring over entire states or entire regions. It's just this kind of one narrow stretch that lined up just right over Chicago and in through southern Michigan and over into Detroit, and they're getting it in terms of snow. I got another radar view in here somewhere, and let's take a look here with regards to my neck of the woods in the Northeast. And we actually have been seeing some snow shower activity in my neck of the woods, but much of this that's on the coast isn't reaching the ground. But it was snowing rather steadily in parts of the Hudson Valley. But meanwhile, where you see the green, that's where you've got the moderate snows, and they're confined basically to northwestern Pennsylvania, right along, or at least they were along the lakefront in Lake Erie and the state of Ohio, and this continues on up into western New York. This is all, by the way, part of the transition over into a milder regime that's going to be taking over this weekend and setting us up for what will be a bit of a soaking rain. Now, I want to touch on a couple of things right off the bat with regards to the long range. And I wrote a piece this afternoon looking at the next couple of weeks and the issues that stand before us with respect to that. And I'm going to bring up, let me see if I want to make sure I minimize these, because I have a couple of graphics that I worked on. And you can read the whole piece on meteorologistjoecioffi.com. But I want to start off with the jet stream pattern as we move through the next 2 weeks. And here's the problem. Let me bring this up. This is the Europeans' view for Monday. So we can use that as a general a general idea of how the whole jet stream is going to be playing for the next week or two. And here's the setup. You've got this very strong ridge that's out along 140 west up into the Gulf of Alaska. You have a trough that drops down into the west, but it kind of splits away from the flow around a vortex that's near in Hudson Bay that's shooting down cold air. You have a strong ridge out in the Atlantic. So as a result, these shots of cold air come down, and you'll notice that the lines are all very, very tight off the East Coast and going all the way out over the Atlantic Ocean toward Europe. It's a very fast flow, and air masses are going to be moving in and out quickly. There's nothing to hold them in place. The ridge in the Gulf of Alaska, however, is holding in place, and that's kind of keeping this pattern locked in across the continental U.S. and throughout North America. So this is how it starts this week. The point of my piece is that you are not going to get any kind of long-term pattern change until you can get rid of that ridge in the Gulf of Alaska. That ridge has to break down. Otherwise, you're going to wind up with the mean trough too far to the west. The cold air masses will come in and go out. The only way, and I'm not saying that it can't snow in this, it can. The only way it can, however, is that you have to time out. The cold air masses have to time out perfectly with any kind of energy that comes out of the southwest. If you have that happen, then yeah, you could certainly wind up with a snow event. And when I show you the GFS today, you'll see exactly the case that the model does actually try to show something for next weekend. The fact that it's showing it now probably means it won't be there, but nonetheless, Here's the European. That was for next Monday. Now let's jump a week from Monday And you'll notice that it really didn't change very much at all. I'll bring the other map back up, and you could look at it from a standpoint as a comparison, how similar they are. So here is the one for a week from Monday, and this is the one on the other side. Let me bring that up to the top. So here's the one we just looked at, and here's the one for a week from Monday. And you can see they really don't change very much at all. You still have that ridge. It's almost, if you looked at it really fast, you'd be saying, Joe, I'm looking at the same map. No, this is actually in 1 week how little the pattern changes. So again, if you can get cold air that's coming down out of that northern jet, if you can time it out where some kind of short wave comes around and digs a little bit and brings that cold air down into the east in a more important way, and energy from the trough in the west shoots out to the northeast. If you can time everything perfectly, then yeah, you could have a snow event out of this. But that's really the only way you're going to do it. That ridge in the Gulf of Alaska just will not disappear. And in fact, I'm going to bring these maps down, and we're going to jump to the GFS out to day 16. And you'll notice, as I bring that up to the top, we're still pretty much in the same place. Trough in the west, ridge off the east coast along 75 west, building up into eastern Canada, and that ridge that's still along 140 west on up into Alaska. So the GFS is saying that in the long range that this pattern is going to hold for a couple of weeks. The wild card in all of this, of course, is this split of the vortex up in the stratosphere and what kind of impact that may have to the longer term pattern down the road. That is probably the one wild card, but it's a wild card that's probably not going to show up until very late in the game here as far as this forecast period is concerned. So you're now almost to the end of February here, and at least from today's GFS, there's no sign of that ridge breaking down anytime soon. So let's go to what's happening for this weekend, because here in the east, very quietly this week, we are about to have our third weather event in the last 7 days, and it's important because conditions this winter have been somewhat dry, and this is going to be the third time in the last 7 days where we're having a system that's going to produce at least an inch of rain, and possibly even in some places over the weekend maybe 2 inches of rain. There isn't going to be too much happening in the west. As far as the snow is concerned in the lower lakes, there probably will be another round of it, and you can see it here showing up tomorrow as the low that comes out of the Gulf states begins to move to the northeast, and there's your rain that's shooting up the eastern seaboard. There's no real cold air. The frontal boundary sets up just inland of the coast, so you've got a wave that develops on it, but there's no real cold air until long after it's gone. And well north and west this time around, you've got some snows that eventually work their way into New York State, northwestern Pennsylvania Sunday night, and not that much with respect to what happens in northern New England, while there's a little bit of action up in the northern Rockies, and the rest of the U.S. remains quiet. Now, we still have some residual moisture off the southeast coast, and then as we go through next week, looks like a low is going to move across the top, and that is what's going to be ushering in some colder air. There's a high that comes down, and you see that 1038 high approaching Montana. There also seems to be a system that's spinning off the coast of Southern California with some rain there, and as we now are into the latter part of next week. So here's this cold front that comes through along about Thursday night, Friday into the east. Cold high pressure follows, and the model showing some of that energy moving from the southwest into Texas, and from here we wind up with a low that tries to run up the east side of the Appalachians, and that's questionable. which on the late afternoon GFS redevelops it off the Carolinas. Now here's where, as I said earlier, if it times out perfectly, then you could have something like this. But that is a huge, huge if at this point, 9 days in advance. So I really would not take any faith in this literal print of what the GFS did. Bear that in mind. This is going to have to really line up perfectly given the upper air scenario that we are faced with. And then beyond that, we do have a little bit of action coming into the western part of the United States as we go into day 10. At this point, I'm going to switch over to the upper air. So let's look at see if there's any real change in what the upper air is doing. And remember, what we're looking for is that ridge in the Gulf of Alaska. You see it here. This is today. And we'll go ahead and you can watch the action that takes shape with respect to the weekend. Now there's the energy that drops down into California, that eventually some of that gets kicked eastward for the system for next weekend. Notice middle of next week, where's the ridge? It's off, still at 140, built up toward Alaska, so it's still off the west coast. Now, one of the things that this run does is, with respect to anything that happens a week from now, is that it brings that ridge inland to the west coast. And you can see it here, and as a result, you've got this trough that digs down and sharpens as it swings across the northeast. You see where the ridge line is here as we move into a week. This is Sunday night. The ridge now is just inland of the west coast, which is in a much more favorable position for something to happen in the east. But that's what has to happen. We don't know that that ridge is going to actually do that. If it winds up not doing this, then I can guarantee you that the outcome in the east is going to be far different than what the GFS shows. Now, as we move through into the longer range, so we are now at day 11. Let's see if that ridge comes back in at along 140 and up into Alaska. And in fact, it does move inland, at least on this particular run, going out through the period. That ridge kind of flattens there. Now, there's other things going on that we're going to have to pay attention to with respect to what's happening in Canada. Are we going to have some sort of polar connection here? And at this point, it doesn't look like there is one. It might be in getting ready to transition into something late in the month, but you know, here we are, February 23rd, and what do we have? We have a ridge in the east, and we have a trough down through the Rockies and into the western plains. Ridge comes into the west coast, and why don't we look at what this means at the surface? I'll jump back a bit, and we'll put the U.S. map up. And okay, so here we are for next week. So there's our perfectly timed system for next weekend, and that goes out. And there you have a low with that trough where it sets up in the west. You've got some kind of deep low that the model takes up into Minnesota, with rain all the way up into the upper peninsula of Michigan, with a low going to the western lakes, and you know, a little cold air that follows, but nothing crazy cold. So there you have it, folks. I mean, with respect to that longer term pattern, you're going to have that chance maybe next weekend if things time out. And I got to tell you that I see it now so far in advance to the GFS showing a perfect and almost perfect prog with regards to what it's expecting. Chances are the next couple of runs we're going to see a slightly altered picture. Remember, the key is that ridge off the west coast coming inland. If that doesn't happen, then you're not going to get what the model is showing this time around. Here's a look at Europe as we watch the next round of rain and snow coming into the British Isles over the weekend and into early next week. You got a flow that's coming down from Greenland, so that's going to keep you guys busy with waves of rain and snow going forward, pushing into some rain into parts of France. Here's a deep low that winds up going between Greenland and Britain along about day 6, which is on Thursday. That's a pretty wrapped up storm that heads up towards Iceland. and that creates a cold flow into the latter part of next week. So for you guys, you've got more wintertime weather that you're going to have for the next 10 days plus. Snow-wise, as we look in Europe, let's pull up the snow map and see what the GFS is indicating on its daily adventure. So it still has, you know, a fair amount of snow over parts of Britain, Ireland, especially in northern areas, inland areas in France and through Germany, and down into Italy, especially up in the Alps, up in Scandinavia, which always gets pounded. And as far as the U.S. goes, we'll go back over the next 10 days. Now remember, this is going to be skewed considerably. This is what the model does with that perfect scenario for next weekend. I put a perfect in quotes, with 6 to 12 from interior Virginia through Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and into southern New England. I am telling you right now, I would not in 100 years forecast that this time, this far out. Going backwards, just to show you tonight and in through tomorrow with what's happening over the lakes. So we'll run that by you, and you can see here is a stripe of additional snows that have already. I was looking at trying to find snow amounts in and around Chicago. It looks like they had about 8 to 12 in most places, and that's lower than what was forecasted, 12 to 18 yesterday. So the model had I think, a better view. I'm not trying to fault the forecasters in any way. Just that this time around the models seemed forecasts were above what the model consensus was, and the model seemed to handle it pretty well. So an additional 1 to 4 inches of snow over the next 2 days across the lower lakes and back up and through parts of Missouri and in through Illinois. And you can also see some additional snows through Monday through upstate New York. That includes what's happening now with this evening and on up into parts of northern New England. So northern ski areas are going to do pretty well with this going forward. So you kind of get a flavor here for what's happening in the upper atmosphere. I'll show you the teleconnections, which when I saw them today, I thought at first I was looking at yesterday's, but they were exactly the same. You've got the PNA strongly. This was based on the 0Z run from last night, so this would be different if we looked at it based on the run we're seeing now. You see where the PNA kind of rises from off the wall negative to slightly negative here along about the 17th or 18th. That would be corresponding to next Sunday, Monday, I believe. Yes, that would be next Sunday, Monday. Perhaps if we ran teleconnection indices based on this afternoon's GFS, that operational run, you would probably show the PNA spiking positive here at this point, and the NAO continues to remain off the wall positive until we get to the 15th, and starts to drop, but it's still very strongly positive as we go through this entire period, which was a change from a couple of days ago. And of course the EPO is moderately negative pretty much right through the period. So at least that's the one thing that probably that's reflecting those colder air shots that are coming down that you're seeing. So the EPO is at least saying, okay, we've got these cold air masses coming down, but without the PNA or the NAO or some combination of those two being in better positions, you're going to have a tough time sustaining the cold air. So it's going to be a matter of watching these systems timing themselves out. So I'm going to come to the chat board now. It's a Friday, and I'm glad the week is over because I could really use a couple of days rest here, even though it wasn't particularly crazy this week. You got that one day with the freezing rain that was always problematic. So let me just give a big collective hello to everybody. It's good to see everybody on board on a Friday. Friday's usually the slow weather day when it comes to YouTube and Facebook and websites. People are thinking about Friday nights and having, enjoying themselves, happy hour, and so on. Adam Fitz, even though it's 10 days out and the models fluctuate rather quickly, if that model is correct, it would be impressive. That is a big if, Adam Fitz. if the model is correct, which, as I said, you're going to have to get everything to time perfectly. I would have rather, I'll tell you something, quite honestly, because I expect it to change. The European, by the way, has the same idea. It's just that the European does not have as cold an air mass coming down, so it would have mostly rain near the coast and snows going inland with that. It has kind of the same idea, though. The key is going to be that ridge, that upper high, coming in inland of the west coast, as opposed to staying off the west coast. Let's see. Curious to see if you think the event on the 19th is just the models catching up with the teleconnections we're saying. Can't hang my hat on something 10 days out. Of course you can't hang your hat on it. Tom Veltman, you should not hang your hat on it. I'm telling you right now, you're going to see the next 3-4 runs, you're going to see this model change on this. Because I bet you it's going to time something out differently, and I would bet that the one thing that may be different is going to be that ridge in the west, that it's going to be more off the west coast than inland of the west coast. Adam Fitz, phase 8 incoming, and I know you're referring to the Madden-Julian oscillation. I've been reading a lot of folks that follow that, been reading their posts on it, and they're not especially bullish. Apparently it's stuck in phase 7 and it doesn't seem to want to go into phase 8, or if it does go into phase 8, it might do so weakly. And by the way, you could have those the phases, just as I said about the fact that you could have all the teleconnections in the world in your favor. If you don't have the ridge and trough in the right place, you're going to have a problem. Well, the same holds true with the Madden-Julian oscillation. You could have those favorable phases. I believe it's 8, 1, and 2. But if you don't have that impacting the polar jet in any way, then it's not going to do you any good. It's got to have impact. It's got to make some kind of connection to where it's impacting the polar jet, and that may not happen. So we have to just wait and see how models change and evolve over time, obviously. And no relief yet for Amarillo either, by the way, that I saw. Well, Anthony, I know the long-range European now is suddenly showing things to be on the warm side going into March, and again, you know, with the long range, that may very well be if you can't break this pattern down. And until I see something that breaks it down, you know, the one wild card in all of this is that stratospheric vortex split that we've been talking about, that split in the highest levels of the atmosphere of the polar vortex. But even those that follow it, from what I've been reading, are saying that the way this split is occurring, they don't really have a lot of analogs to go back and look at and say, well, this is it looks the same as this, and this was the and therefore this was the outcome. They only have a couple of examples of it. So I think it's as big a mystery to them in terms of what this is going to mean. And all it may mean is that it may just extend the pattern that we're already in. So just bear that in mind. Bob Livingsworth, how things would be with a negative EPO and a negative NAO combined. Well, it would depend on how negative those two indices are. You could have, you know, a negative EPO with a negative NAO would probably mean cold weather in the east in general. But the question is, if the NAO is too negative, then you're going to wind up with storm tracks way to the south, probably. If the EPO is too negative, you could wind up with overwhelming cold air everywhere, and that's also a problem. We saw that was the case when we were in our cold blast from mid-December to mid-January. The EPO was so off the wall negative that you wound up with everything getting suppressed way to the south. Let's see. And by the way, yeah, Raymond, you make a good point. We should also have the normal atmospheric warming that's going to be going on with the fact that we are now seasonally heading towards spring. We've hit bottom in terms of temperatures. The average temperatures are now beginning to rise. and they will start to accelerate once we get into March. Tom Adams, ocean warmth prevails in the East Coast this winter. Ocean water temperatures, I haven't really looked at the anomalies. I happened to glance at some of the water temperature numbers around here, and they're in the upper 30s, which is usually where they are around this time of year, upper 30s to around 40. So I don't know how the area is in general with respect to the ocean water temperatures. But the ocean water temperatures don't bottom for another couple of weeks. They usually hit their bottom at the end of February, very beginning of March, before they start to rise. Let me see who asked. Oh, and David Schwartz, where is the NAO located? Okay, you know what? Rather than just quote it off the top of my head, if you go to, actually gives you the formula, okay, for the North Atlantic Oscillation. So basically, the North Atlantic Oscillation it's measured over two areas, two very large areas. There's an area from 35 degrees north to 45 degrees north, and between 10 west and 70 west. So virtually all of the Mid-Atlantic, and then you have the area well to the north, between 55 degrees north and 70 degrees north. So we're talking about up toward the polar regions and across Greenland, and and out to 10 west. And what you look at is, in fact, I will I can give you the link to that index. If you look on the main page here, it tells you how these indices are calculated. It's the pressure changes over both those areas, the difference between those two areas. So if the pressure is between 35 degrees north and 45 degrees north, in both cases it's 70 west to 10 west, so basically the whole Atlantic. The pressures between 35 degrees north and 45 degrees north, you want the pressures in that area to be lower than average. Between 55 degrees north and 70 degrees north, you want those pressures to be higher than average. And it's the difference between the two that gives you the value of the and then you plot that and you can see the oscillation. So that's your area, and I'll put the link up. If you just look down, it'll tell you each one. The East Pacific Oscillation, for example, is from 20 north to 35 degrees north. Okay, so that actually extends down into the tropical Atlantic, and from 160 west, so near Hawaii, out to 125 west. Okay, so you want lower than average pressures there, and you want higher than average pressures between 55 and 65 north and 160 and 125. So that upper ridge in the Gulf of Alaska is creating the negative EPO. Okay, now the PNA, the Pacific Oscillation, that is 25 north to 40 north. Okay, so that's the zone, and then between 100, this goes all the way out from 140 east to 150 west. Okay, so this is the Western Pacific Oscillation, which we don't look at. The WPO, same idea. The PNA is, okay, the PNA goes deep down in the tropics, so between 15 and 25 north, it's a much more complex formula. So it's the pressure changes between 15 and 25 north and 140 to 180 west, so basically down near Hawaii, the tropical Pacific, down near, and the subtropical Pacific down near Hawaii. Then you've got the second area, which is from 40 north to 50 north and 180 to 140 west. You want lower pressures near the area in the tropical Pacific. You want higher than normal pressures between 40 and 50 north and 140 and 180. So that's just on top of that zone. So you want higher pressures to the north of Hawaii, and then you want higher than normal pressures in the area from 45 to 60 north, 125 west to 105 west. That's the Pacific Northwest, and on up into southwestern Canada. And then there's one other area they subtract, which is the southeastern part of the United States. So you want that troughing in the east and the ridge in the west. And again, I'll put the link up here for you guys so you can you can scroll down a little bit past the top of the page, and you can see the formulas that are there. And if you click on them, you can see a long-term plot of the oscillation. And I've argued, by the way, and I will continue to argue that the NAO is probably the least of the three, but when it is strongly negative and the other two indices are in their respective favorable positions, then you got to start looking for the possibility of something that might be more on the order of a blockbuster, and we don't have that. We don't have that issue at the moment. And yes, Bobby Livingsworth, you never realized how difficult weather can be. It is tough sometimes. It's like, but it's one of those things where the learning curve is huge. Once you kind of get over the top, and after you've done this a number of times over a number of years, your brain kind of goes automatic. So you like anything, you learn, and you experience, and you learn some more. Shelly Man Studios 20K. We're going to be in the mid 40s next week in Connecticut, at least for a good chunk, for at least through much of next week. Maybe toward the end of next week it will get colder, but again, weather models are known to be fickle. Have I ever consulted bird migrations for clues to winter, early or late spring? I mean, I've watched, you watch and you notice things. They leave early, they hang around. Sometimes, they do have a sense of what's happening, but in terms of what that means specifically for your particular point, I don't know that you can derive anything from that. But as with anything in nature, part of this is, long-term observation to see what the outcomes are. Animals do tend to figure things out a little faster than humans, maybe because they are far more in tune with their environment and nature, like we used to be before we became, quote, civilized. You think the link you posted got cut off by YouTube, so it doesn't show the entire thing. Okay, so you know what? Let me just go to here. Let me just put the first. See if the first part of that link prints. Try that, and maybe that'll work. I don't know if that got cut off or not. Maybe it did. But if it does, you can message me directly. I'll try and get it for you. It's the ES or Google ESRL. Okay, it should come up if you Google ESRL, the Earth System Research Laboratory. Okay, and put in PNA, EPO, and NAO in that Google search, and it will come up. It's not like all the birds have a meeting on it and decide to move at once. I don't know, Jason. You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised at the way they have done studies showing that there is communication that goes on with some species that do long-term migrations. Okay, it's not just some automatic thing. And in fact, there has been research to show that it's a taught behavior of that birds teach the migratory paths to the younger generation. So maybe they do have a powwow and a sit down. Let's see. If it's a cloudy fall, they may leave early. Well, that's true. I didn't happen to notice this year with the warm October that we had whether they left or they didn't. I did notice. I remember with Hurricane Sandy that they were flying inland a couple of days before, so they certainly sensed that something was coming. How long do I think this system will stay in Colorado? Which one are we talking about, Dusty Rose? Let me just go back. Let me review. Because you do have this one moving through tonight and Saturday. That drops rapidly southward. And then you have a weak one that comes in on Tuesday, but that doesn't do very much, so I don't think it's going to last very long. The dryness and the lack of storm activity in the west continues to be considerable, and doesn't show any. Maybe with that trough coming into the west, if the models are correct, it's going to get more active as we move along in the longer term. All right, so why don't we just call it a day at this point? You can read some more on what I think about the long range. Again, go to meteorologistjoecioffi.com. You can link to that right here from my YouTube channel. Just go to the banner at the top of my channel page, and there's a link there to Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Google+, and I think that's it. So you can go to all those things. We're going to try and do. We didn't do a Joe and Joe show last night. We both were too tired, so we didn't do it. But you might be able to check out some more tonight if we get around to doing a Joe and Joe show on Facebook at 9:15 Eastern Time. So you can join us with that. I'll be around over the weekend. I don't know. I may take a break either Saturday or Sunday. But if there's rain around or if the models are interesting, I'll probably do a live stream, but I'm not 100% sure on the time. Weekends are always in fluctuation. I've got stuff I want to do. I need a little downtime, so I will try to get one in at some point on Saturday, and again also on Sunday. And I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I have to tell you guys. No, so we're good. All right, have a great evening and a great weekend. We will see you tomorrow.